Hello fellow collectors, I hope you're all doing really well. Today I'm continuing my series on the best films I watched in the preceding month. Now I know this one is much later than usual, but it's just been quite a busy few weeks for me, so without further ado, here's the best films I watched during May. Well, I started last month with a bit of a Wes Anderson phase, though sadly I don't have all his films, so I wasn't able to revisit a couple of the ones I would have liked to. I still made my way through 4 of his films that I hadn't seen for a good long while, and I mentioned 2 in my list here. First one is The Life Aquatic. I think I've said it in an earlier video, but The Life Aquatic was actually the first Criterion release that I bought, and that was back in May or June 2020. Well, finally, 2 years later, I cracked it open for a watch. Now, I remember seeing this film for the first time, I think around 2012-ish, and it blew my mind, honestly. I had never seen anything like it before, and I didn't know films could be this way. Comedic, irreverent, with poignant and serious moments, all incredibly stylistic and beautiful to look at. At once realistic and at the same time very obviously manufactured. Well, I'm glad to say that my thoughts haven't changed one bit since I watched this for the first time. I loved every second of it. The cast works so wonderfully well together, and I think in particular the legendary Bill Murray is in his element. Cate Blanchett, though of course as an actor even bigger now than she's ever been, I'm surprised we haven't seen more of her in Anderson's films, as she is just perfect here, and I think fits in so well with the overall vibe. I definitely hope we see her return to some of his films in the future. For me, the thread of joviality in the face of what should be a serious matter makes Wes Anderson's films a unique experience. He often plays these real-life consequences that you would think should be discordant with the lighter feeling, and yet they feel like that pinch of salt that brings out the flavour and everything else. Lastly, making my way through some of his films, I think The Life Aquatic is where he really nails his particular aesthetic for the first time, though of course it's clearly evident in earlier films. Here it just feels more fully formed, and there is just such a stunning design to everything. I'm glad to say that The Life Aquatic remains my favourite of his films, and it was just such a fun thing to rewatch it. Next is Moonrise Kingdom. Another Criterion release that's been sat unopened on my shelf for a good long while. And just as a quick aside, my goodness, this is a beautiful release. I know lots of people aren't huge fans of the Digipack, but here I think it works quite nicely, and I've been really enjoying displaying this one ever since I watched it, so I can appreciate it a bit more. Well, Moonrise Kingdom essentially is a film about young love. I think I'd summarise this entire film by saying, if kids could articulate like adults and speak with the eloquence that they desired to, then this is what they would sound like. Like most of Wes Anderson's films, it's just written exquisitely in his fairly singular style of language. As usual, the cast is superb, and the main 2 kids that we follow were absolutely wonderful. Fantastic young actors that did such a great job and really carry the film on their shoulders, and you feel very invested in their relationship. Quirky is a word that has definitely been overused to describe Anderson's films, but it just applies so well. I particularly love the use of a narrator here, so deftly played by Bob Balaban. The setting itself is wonderful and in the fictional New Penzance, but actually shot on a beautiful Prudence Island in the state of Rhode Island. As well as the romantic aspect, it's really an adventure at heart as well, both in the chasing and the escaping. Overall, just a lovely story, gorgeously filmed, and one that brings me so much joy. Up next, and we have The Souvenir Part 2. I've been slowly making my way through some of the films of Joanna Hogg, and I came across The Souvenir at the end of last year, and it absolutely blew me away. My goodness, what incredible quality, story, acting and filmmaking. It's a real masterpiece. Well, I've been looking forward to watching part 2 ever since I heard it announced, and sadly, while I didn't get to see it in a cinema, I did end up watching it on my birthday, which added something quite nice to the experience. While not quite the magnum opus of part 1, it was still excellent and carries on the story right from where the first left off. What has been described as Hogg's most autobiographical work, this part 2 delves into grief and the solace that filmmaking can bring, as our protagonist Julie explores and tries to come to terms with her pain through artistic creation. Honor Swinton and Tilda Swinton are again a fantastic duo, and of course real life mother and daughter. There is a great supporting cast here, and the world is fleshed out, lived in, and there is just depth to everything that takes place. It's a wonderful, if melancholy, second part to the story, and I can't recommend both part 1 and 2 enough. Then we have Paper Moon, directed by Peter Bogdanovich, and only the second film of his that I've seen, this one from 1973. Something quite wonderful about this one is that our main characters, played by Ryan O'Neal and Tatum O'Neal, were actually real-life father and daughter. Taking nothing away from Tatum O'Neal's performance, I think it definitely helped her acting, as there is just a wonderful dynamic between them. I'm quite a fan of these slices of life / Americana type films, and this one is wonderfully made. I think I mentioned it in my pickups video where I talk a little bit about this one. But despite Ryan O'Neal's character being a sort of drifter con man with not many moral scruples, I definitely found myself able to connect and engage a lot more in this film and with his character as well as the little girls. It's really a road trip story more or less, and you get to see this relationship develop between a man and a little girl who possibly might be related. They grow closer together and she gets involved in his various rackets and cons and somehow starts to add her own morality into the immorality. It's a very sweet story despite the shady nature of events and characters, and one that I thoroughly enjoyed. Next is A Scene at the Sea. This is the second Takeshi Kitano film that I've seen, and a second of 4 third window titles that I picked up a while ago. Made in 1991, and this is one where Kitano himself doesn't appear but just directs. It's the story of a young deaf man who works as a garbage man that comes across a beat-up surfboard on his rounds, and then follows his journey learning how to surf. It seems to be a particular skill of Kitano's to engage the audience to care so much about a protagonist who speaks so little, or in this case, not at all. I think this one is a story about following after passions and dreams, and those that care about you supporting you. We have our protagonist's girlfriend, also deaf, who is there each step of the way, encouraging and silently supporting and helping. We've got a surf shop owner who takes a special interest, and then some assorted other surfers who vary a bit in their interest to help at all. It's a quiet, slow-paced film that is full of warmth, emotion and great characters. I loved it. What else can I say? Last but not least, we have The Naked City. I'd describe this one as more of a crime film than a film noir, but certainly has some noir elements to it. It's from 1948 and directed by Jules Dassin. Something really great about both The Naked City and Brute Force included in this little box set was at the beginning of the films there is a wonderful little blurb about all the important restoration work that went into them, and I loved reading about it. This one is a fantastic journey as we follow the inimitable and seemingly unflappable Detective Muldoon, played wonderfully by Barry Fitzgerald, as he figures out the mystery, accompanied by Don Taylor as the young detective Halloran. There's so many elements in this one that make it incredibly enjoyable. We are straight into the action with a fairly shocking murder of a young model by 2 men, followed quickly by one of those men murdering the other. Without giving the whole story away, we have a great mystery that unfolds, with a character who is a compulsive liar, another model and former friend and colleague of the deceased, 2 parents who act strangely, a doctor who's prescribed some pills, and to add to the murders, several high-value thefts. It's a really fantastic story, and I thoroughly enjoyed every minute. Interestingly, the outdoor scenes here were shot entirely on the streets of New York, and in that way reminds me a little bit of the French New Wave films, where you can absolutely see the public looking into the camera, but it does give a lovely authentic look and feel, and a small insight into life in late 40s New York. For anyone interested in this box set, I can highly recommend it, and I believe it is still available. Both Brute Force and Naked City are absolutely worth watching, and on sale it usually goes for around £20 to £25-ish. A couple honourable mentions would be Manhunt, a Fritz Lang film which I really enjoyed, though I thought the story lacked just a bit of depth, and then a rewatch of Jurassic Park with my niece and nephews, which was a wonderful experience and still such a fantastic film. Well, that sums up my May in film. I hope yours was also fantastic, and I hope that your June has been going great as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.